Lena Ray arrived at Forward Operating Base Granite each morning at 0500 hours, 30 minutes before anyone else bothered to show up. She preferred it that way. The command tent was quiet then, just a steady hum of electronics, and the soft glow of monitors painting the canvas walls in blue light. Her coffee mug bore the faded logo of her civilian contractor company, a reminder that she didn't belong to this world of uniforms and salutes. At 32, Lena had spent more time analyzing combat scenarios than most of the officers around her had spent in actual combat. Her official designation read Technical Support Specialist, Fire Control Systems, which translated to the woman who fixes the screens when they blink. She'd accepted the role knowing exactly what it meant. In the military hierarchy, she ranked somewhere between furniture and inconvenience. The morning briefings followed the same pattern. Major Collins would stride in, his boots echoing against the metal flooring, followed by Lieutenant Morrison, fresh from the academy and eager to prove himself. Behind them came the enlisted men, Sergeant Williams from the forward observation post, Corporal Jenkins, who operated the fire control console, and Sergeant Price, who treated his rifle like a beloved pet. Lena would sit in her corner, surrounded by monitors that displayed satellite feeds, weather patterns, and enemy movement predictions. The screens showed her a story written in pixels and probabilities. But when she tried to share that story, the room would fall silent. Not the respectful silence of consideration, but the awkward quiet of adults humoring a child. "Miss Ray," Major Collins had said during her first week, "your job is to keep the lights blinking. We'll worry about when to fire." The dismissal came wrapped in a smile, but the message was clear. She was technical support, not tactical input. The base sat on the edge of a conflict zone nobody wanted to acknowledge officially. They called it a stabilization operation in the reports, but everyone knew they were positioned to respond to increasing enemy activity in the region. The geography was unforgiving. Rocky valleys that could hide entire convoys, weather patterns that shifted like moods, and terrain that turned every military advantage into a potential liability. Lena understood the landscape better than anyone. She'd studied every geological survey, memorized every elevation change, analyzed weather data going back 20 years. Her predictive mapping software could forecast enemy movements with an accuracy that should have made her invaluable. Instead, it made her invisible. The system's showing anomalous readings, she'd said during a briefing last month, pointing to movement patterns that didn't match known patrol routes. The signature suggests organized movement, possibly mechanized. Lieutenant Morrison had glanced at her screen, then back at his paper maps. "Miss Ray, we appreciate your technical observations, but battlefield interpretation requires experience you don't have." Experience. The word stung because it contained just enough truth to hurt. She'd never worn the uniform, never felt the weight of command, never had to make split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. But she'd run thousands of combat simulations, studied every major artillery engagement from the past decade, and understood the mathematical poetry of ballistics better than anyone in the tent. The morning routine continued unchanged. Officers would discuss patrol routes and defensive positions using acronyms that turned war into a private language. Lena would monitor her screens, watching data streams that painted pictures of an evolving battlefield. When she offered adjustments based on her analysis, they'd nod politely, then proceed with their original plans. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that preceded trouble. The way Sergeant Williams would clean his rifle obsessively before difficult missions. How Major Collins would study his paper maps longer when satellite intelligence suggested enemy movement. The particular quality of silence that filled the tent, when everyone sensed something was wrong, but couldn't quite identify what. That morning, the signs were everywhere. Satellite feeds showed weather patterns that would provide perfect cover for enemy movement. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures that could indicate mechanized units positioning for an assault. The predictive algorithms flagged multiple warning indicators, painting a picture of coordinated enemy activity that should have triggered immediate defensive preparations. "Sir," Lena had said, her voice cutting through the morning briefing. "The pattern analysis indicates probable enemy positioning for a dawn assault. They're using the weather front as cover." The room fell silent. Not the thoughtful silence of consideration, but the uncomfortable quiet of people who wished she hadn't spoken. Major Collins continued studying his maps. Lieutenant Morrison adjusted his headset. Sergeant Price continued cleaning his rifle. "Miss Ray," Collins said without looking up, "we appreciate your technical insights, but tactical decisions require experience you don't have. Your job is to monitor the equipment, not interpret intelligence." The dismissal hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Around the tent, enlisted men exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable with the casual dismissal of her expertise. Others seemed relieved that someone had put the civilian contractor back in her place. Lena turned back to her screens, watching the data streams that told a story nobody wanted to hear. The enemy was out there, moving with purpose and coordination. The weather would provide perfect cover. The terrain offered ideal positions for a surprise assault. Everything pointed to an attack that would come whether the command staff believed her analysis or not. She'd learned to swallow the frustration, to channel it into obsessive preparation. If they wouldn't listen to her warnings, she'd make sure. She was ready when those warnings proved accurate. Her screen showed trajectory calculations, wind corrections, and target solutions that would be needed when the shooting started. The morning briefing ended with the usual assignments. Routine. Patrols, standard defensive positions, equipment maintenance. No special preparations for the attack that Lena's analysis predicted with mathematical certainty. No adjustments to patrol routes or defensive positioning. No additional communications protocols or emergency procedures. As the officers filed out, Lena remained at her station, watching the screens that showed her truths nobody wanted to acknowledge. The enemy was coming. The weather was perfect for their approach. The terrain favored their assault plans. Every data point screamed warning, but warnings required people willing to listen. She pulled up the geological survey data, cross-referencing it with the movement patterns her sensors had detected. The enemy was positioning for a precision strike, using the storm front as cover, planning to punch through their weakest defensive line. She could see it all unfolding in the data streams. A digital prophecy written in coordinates and timestamps. Outside the tent, the base continued its morning routine. Soldiers heading to breakfast, maintenance crews checking equipment, guards changing shifts. Normal activity for a normal bay, because nobody believed anything abnormal was about to happen. Lena knew better. She'd learned to read the electronic tea leaves, to see patterns that revealed intentions. The enemy wasn't just moving randomly. They were positioning with purpose, coordinating with precision, preparing for something that would test every assumption about who belonged at the decision-making table. The screens kept blinking. The data kept flowing. The warnings kept mounting. And Lena kept watching, knowing that respect was often denied to those not wearing the right uniform until everything started burning. The morning of the attack, tension crackled through the command tent like electricity before a storm. Lena had arrived earlier than usual, her coffee growing cold as she studied overnight intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The enemy movement patterns had accelerated, showing the kind of coordination that suggested something bigger than routine patrol activity. Her screens displayed a complex web of data: satellite thermal imaging, seismic sensors, electronic intercepts, and weather analysis. Together, they told a story that made her stomach tighten with anticipation. The enemy wasn't just moving. They were positioning with military precision, using the incoming storm front as perfect cover for what appeared to be a coordinated assault. "Major Collins," she called out as he entered the tent, his morning briefing materials tucked under his arm. The overnight analysis shows significant escalation in enemy activity. They're moving mechanized units into position under cover of the weather front. Collins glanced at her screens, his expression unchanged. "Miss Ray, we've been monitoring the same intelligence feeds. Nothing indicates immediate threat assessment changes. Sir, the pattern analysis suggests they're preparing for a dawn assault. The positioning is too coordinated to be routine patrol activity." She pulled up a tactical overlay showing enemy movement vectors. They're using the storm to mask their approach, positioning for a breakthrough assault on our eastern perimeter. Lieutenant Morrison looked up from his communications check. "Miss Ray, with respect, pattern analysis is intelligence interpretation, not technical support. We have trained intelligence officers for battlefield assessment." The dismissal stung, but Lena pressed forward. "The mathematical models show probability calculations that—" "Miss Ray," Collins interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Your technical expertise is valuable for maintaining our fire control systems. Intelligence analysis requires training and experience in combat operations that you don't possess." Around the tent, enlisted men continued their morning preparations. Sergeant Williams checked communication equipment with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned the details could mean the difference between life and death. Corporal Jenkins ran diagnostic checks on the fire control console, his movements practiced and efficient. Lena turned back to her screens, frustration building like pressure in a sealed container. The data was clear, unambiguous, mathematically certain. Enemy units were positioning for assault. Weather conditions were optimal for their approach. Terrain analysis showed they'd chosen the perfect route for maximum surprise and impact. But data without authority was just noise. Her expertise without rank was just opinion. Her warnings without uniform were just suggestions that nobody felt obligated to consider seriously. The geological survey data shows their positioning along approach routes that would allow them to exploit our defensive blind spots, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. They're using the canyon system to mask their movement, timing their advance to coincide with the storm front. Nobody responded. The morning briefing continued around her, officers discussing patrol schedules and maintenance requirements as if the enemy wasn't preparing to turn their comfortable routine into chaos. She watched her screens, seeing the future written in pixels and probabilities, knowing that warnings were meaningless without people willing to listen. The weather front moved closer, exactly as her meteorological analysis had predicted. The storm would provide perfect cover for enemy movement, masking thermal signatures and disrupting electronic surveillance. It was tactically brilliant, the kind of coordinated approach that suggested professional military planning rather than insurgent opportunism. Her predictive algorithms updated throughout the morning, each calculation reinforcing the same conclusion. Enemy assault imminent. Approach route identified. Target objectives clear. The mathematics were elegant in their certainty, beautiful in their precision, and completely ignored by everyone with the authority to act on them. Corporal Jenkins approached their station during a brief lull in the briefing. "Miss Ray," he said quietly, "what are you seeing on those screens?" She looked at the young soldier, recognizing something in his expression that the officers lacked: genuine curiosity about what the data was telling her. "The enemy is positioning for a coordinated assault," she said simply. "Multiple units, mechanized support, using the storm as cover." Jenkins studied her screens, his expression growing serious. "When? Based on movement patterns and weather analysis, they'll be in position for assault within the next few hours." Probably time to coincide with the height of the storm. He nodded slowly, understanding the implications. You told the major? I told him. He told me to stick to technical support. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She tried to keep her frustration professional, but the casual dismissal of her expertise was wearing away her patience. For what it's worth, Jenkins said, I've seen your analysis before. You're usually right about this stuff. The quiet validation meant more than he probably realized. At least one person in the tent understood that her technical expertise extended beyond keeping screens functioning. Someone recognized that her analysis had value beyond maintenance schedules and equipment diagnostics. As the morning progressed, the signs became more obvious. Electronic intercepts showed increased enemy communication activity. Seismic sensors detected movement patterns consistent with mechanized units. Weather analysis confirmed optimal conditions for surprise assault. Everything pointed to the same conclusion her early analysis had reached. But the command staff continued their routine preparations, adjusting patrol schedules and reviewing defensive positions based on standard protocols rather than current intelligence. The disconnect between what the data showed and what the officers believed created a tension that filled the tent like an approaching storm. Lena found herself checking and rechecking her calculations, hoping she was wrong, praying that her analysis was flawed. She didn't want to be right about the coming assault. She didn't want to watch men die because warnings had been ignored. But the mathematics were unforgiving, and the data didn't lie. The storm front moved closer, and with it, the enemy she was certain was hiding in its shadow. Her screens showed the tactical situation with brutal clarity. They were about to be hit by a coordinated assault, and nobody with the authority to prepare for it believed her analysis. She'd done everything she could within the constraints of her position. She provided analysis, offered recommendations, shared her expertise. The fact that nobody wanted to listen wasn't her fault, but it would be her problem when the shooting started. The morning briefing ended with routine assignments and standard preparations. No special alerts, no defensive modifications, no acknowledgement that anything unusual was about to happen. The officers filed out, leaving Lena alone with her screens and her certainty that their comfortable routine was about to become a nightmare. She pulled up the fire control systems, running diagnostic checks and updating targeting solutions that she hoped wouldn't be needed but knew would be essential. If the officers wouldn't listen to her warnings, she'd make sure she was ready when those warnings proved accurate. The screens kept blinking, the data kept flowing, and the enemy kept approaching. Lena kept watching, knowing that respect was often denied to those not wearing the right uniform until everything started burning. The first shell hit at 0-4-30-1 hours, screaming out of the pre-dawn darkness with the precision of mathematical certainty. Lena had been monitoring her screens when the proximity alarms began shrieking, her coffee mug shattering against the floor as the explosion rocked the entire command tent. The enemy's opening shot was surgically precise, targeting their satellite uplink with the kind of accuracy that spoke to professional military intelligence and careful planning. Sparks cascaded from damaged equipment as twisted metal and severed cables turned their technological advantage into smoking debris. The main communications array dropped like a felled tree, antennas crashing to the ground in a symphony of destruction. Inside the command tent, chaos erupted with the force of a natural disaster. Maps scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Equipment screens flickered and died, then struggled back to life showing fragmented information. The tactical display painted incomplete pictures of a battlefield that had suddenly become very real and immediately dangerous. What the hell was that? Lieutenant Morrison shouted, grabbing for a headset that answered his calls with nothing but static. The communication systems that had connected them to the outside world now produced only electronic noise, leaving them isolated and blind. Major Collins burst through the tent entrance, his uniform torn and face blackened with smoke from the explosion. "Status report," he demanded, but nobody could provide one. The screens that usually painted clear pictures of their tactical situation now showed only fragments and guesses. Radios crackled with broken transmissions from units across the base. "Taking fire at Checkpoint Alpha, casualties reported. Need immediate." The voices cut in and out, creating a patchwork of urgency that told them everything and nothing about their situation. Lena remained at her station, her fingers moving across keyboards with practiced efficiency, while officers shouted orders that nobody could hear and grabbed communication equipment that couldn't transmit. She worked to restore the systems that would make sense of the chaos around them. Her screen showed what she'd predicted: enemy units executing a coordinated assault, using the storm as cover, striking at precisely the targets her analysis had identified. The mathematical models had been perfect in their accuracy, beautiful in their precision, and completely ignored by everyone with the authority to act on them. "Battery positions compromised," came a fragmentary transmission through the static. "Forward observer post. Status unknown, ... enemy advancing through Sector 7. The tent filled with the sound of desperation as officers struggled to re-establish communication and coordinate a response to an attack they hadn't seen coming. Equipment that had worked perfectly minutes earlier now produced only frustration and fear. Lena's screens painted a clearer picture than anyone else could see. The enemy assault was unfolding exactly as her analysis had predicted, with mechanized units advancing along the routes she'd identified, targeting the positions she'd warned about. They were executing a textbook surprise attack against a force that had been caught completely unprepared. Sergeant Williams' voice crackled through the static from the forward observation post. "Control, this is Op 7. Enemy armor advancing through canyon approach. Count ... vehicles ... Direction of main base." The transmission cut off, leaving them with fragments of information that suggested the enemy was advancing along multiple axes, coordinating their assault with the precision of a military operation rather than the chaos of opportunistic attack. "Where's the battalion commander?" Morrison demanded, looking around the tent as if Collins might materialize from thin air. "Stepped out to check the perimeter," someone answered. "Right before the first shell hit. Nobody could locate him in." The smoke and confusion that now blanketed the base. The chain of command had fractured with the first explosion, leaving junior officers to make decisions they weren't prepared for about situations they didn't understand. Lena continued working at her station, pulling up targeting solutions and coordinate calculations that would be needed for counter-battery fire. The screens showed enemy positions with the clarity of mathematical certainty, but mathematics without authority was just data waiting for someone with the courage to act on it. "We need to establish communication with higher headquarters," Collins said, his voice carrying the strain of someone trying to maintain control in an increasingly uncontrollable situation. "Get me aligned to brigade command." "Sir, the satellite uplink is down. We're operating on backup systems only." The communications specialist's voice carried the frustration of someone trying to work miracles with broken equipment. The tent shook again as another explosion rocked the base, this one closer than the first. Enemy fire was walking closer to their position, adjusting with the kind of precision that suggested professional spotters and coordinated fire control. Lena watched her screens, seeing the tactical situation with brutal clarity. The enemy was advancing along predicted routes, targeting identified positions, executing the assault she'd warned about with mathematical precision. Her analysis had been perfect, her warnings had been ignored, and now people were dying because expertise without authority was just noise. "Control, this is Alpha Company," a voice crackled through the static. "Taking heavy fire from eastern approaches. Need immediate artillery support on grid. The transmission dissolved into electronic noise, leaving them with another fragment of desperation. The command tent had become a study in controlled panic. Officers moved with urgent purpose, but without clear direction, trying to coordinate a response to an attack. They couldn't see clearly and couldn't communicate about effectively. The fog of war had descended with the first explosion, turning their comfortable routine into a nightmare of uncertainty. Lena's hands moved across her keyboards, updating targeting solutions and calculating firing coordinates that would be needed for effective counter-battery fire. The screen showed her exactly where the enemy was positioned, exactly what targets needed to be engaged, exactly how to coordinate a response that would turn their surprise attack into a costly mistake. But screens without authority were just light shows. Analysis without rank was just opinion. And warnings without uniform were just suggestions that nobody felt obligated to act on, even when acting on them meant the difference between victory and defeat. The radio crackled with another fragmentary transmission. Battery 3, this is control. We need immediate fire mission on. Static consumed the rest of the message, leaving them with another piece of an increasingly desperate puzzle. Lena looked around the tent, seeing officers struggling with equipment that couldn't function and communication systems that couldn't connect. The enemy assault was unfolding exactly as her analysis had predicted, and the response was foundering because nobody had believed her warnings enough to prepare for what was now happening. She turned back to her screens, watching the tactical situation evolve with mathematical precision. The enemy was executing a perfect surprise attack against a force that had been caught completely unprepared. Her analysis had been ignored. Her warnings had been dismissed, and now the price of that dismissal was being paid in blood and chaos. The breaking point had arrived, and with it, the moment when everything would change. The second enemy shell hit close enough to shake dust from the tent ceiling, and in that moment of suspended chaos, Lena Ray made a decision that would define everything that followed. While officers shouted orders that nobody could hear and grabbed radios that couldn't transmit, she stepped forward to the central fire control console. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce her intentions. She didn't wait for someone with the proper authority to make the decision that needed to be made. The mathematical certainty of her analysis had become the brutal reality of enemy fire, and mathematics didn't care about rank or protocol. Her fingers moved across the touchscreen with the confidence of someone who had memorized every system, every coordinate, every calculation that turned raw data into precise response. The screens showed her exactly where the enemy was positioned, exactly what targets needed to be engaged, exactly how to coordinate counter-battery fire that would answer their surprise attack with American precision. Battery 3, fire mission, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. The words carried the authority of absolute certainty, the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done and exactly how to do it. Corporal Jenkins looked up from the fire control console, his finger hovering over the activation key. In the space of a heartbeat, he had to decide whether to follow an order from someone who had no authority to give it, or to wait for permission that might never come from officers who were struggling to understand what was happening. Grid reference 3-4851, Lena continued, her voice steady and clear. Elevation offset for wind drift. Target designation Hotel 7. Battery 3. Fire now. The coordinates flowed from her lips like a prayer sheet. Memorized, each number representing hours of analysis and preparation that had been dismissed as technical noise. But Jenkins had seen her analysis before and watched her screens tell stories that proved accurate with mathematical precision. He looked around the tent. No officer responded to countermand the order. No one told him not to fire. The chain of command had shattered with the first explosion. leaving him to make a decision that would determine whether they responded to the attack or simply endured it. His fingers moved across the control panel, inputting coordinates that would send death screaming across the valley in answer to the enemy's opening move. The fire control system accepted the coordinates, calculated the trajectory, and prepared to deliver American mathematics to enemy positions. The first friendly round screamed into the sky with a metallic shriek that announced their return to the fight. The sound carried the promise of precision, the threat of retaliation, and the mathematical certainty that Lena's analysis had been absolutely correct. "Shot out," Jenkins reported, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just transformed from target to threat. The artillery round traced its ballistic arc through the darkness, carrying with it the accumulated expertise of a woman who had been dismissed as technical support. Lena's screens updated in real time, showing the impact of their counter battery. Fire. The enemy position she targeted disappeared in a flash of light and smoke, confirming what her analysis had predicted with mathematical precision. The first enemy vehicle had been eliminated exactly as her calculations had indicated. Direct hit on enemy command post came a fragmentary transmission through the static. Target destroyed. Enemy units adjusting position. The tactical display showed enemy movement patterns beginning to break apart, their coordinated assault dissolving into scattered retreat as American artillery found its mark. The surprise attack that had begun with such precision was now fracturing under the weight of accurate return fire. Battery 2, shift fire left 200 meters, Lena continued, her hands moving across the console like a pianist playing a deadly sonata. Target designation Hotel 8. Mechanized units advancing through canyon approach. She adjusted. Fire missions with the confidence of someone who had run thousands of simulations, coordinating counterstrikes that turned the enemy's careful planning into their own nightmare. Each adjustment was based on analysis that had been dismissed as technical noise, expertise that had been ignored because it came from someone without the proper uniform. The tent filled with the sound of redemption as their artillery answered. The enemy's opening move with interest compounded by American precision. Each outgoing round carried the accumulated weight of analysis that had been dismissed, warnings that had been ignored, and expertise that had been relegated to technical support. Confirmed, shifting fire, came the response from Battery 2. Target acquired, direct hit on enemy APC. Enemy units breaking off assault. Major Collins stumbled back into the tent, his uniform torn and face blackened with smoke from the explosion that had begun the enemy assault. He looked at the tactical display, then at Lena standing behind the console, her fingers still moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "What's our status?" he asked, his voice carrying the strain of someone trying to understand how chaos had been transformed into controlled response. "Enemy advance stopped," Lena replied without looking up from her screens. 3 vehicles destroyed, 2 more damaged. They're withdrawing to secondary positions. Collins nodded slowly, his eyes moving from the screen to the woman who had taken command when command had failed. Around them, the tent hummed with renewed purpose as communication systems came back online and coordination was restored. "Miss Ray," he said quietly, "what you did ... "I did what needed doing, sir." Her voice carried no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet confidence of someone who had proven herself when proof was written in blood and steel. "You broke the chain of command. I fixed it." The words hung in the air like smoke from their artillery, carrying the weight of absolute certainty and mathematical precision. Collins stared at her for a long moment, then at the tactical display showing enemy forces in full retreat. The after-action report would be interesting, he thought, trying to explain how a civilian contractor had taken tactical command and turned a surprise attack into an enemy defeat. "Write whatever you need to write, sir," Lena said, finally looking up from her screens. But next time, maybe listen when someone's trying to tell you something important." Collins almost smiled. Almost. "There won't be a next time, Ray, because you're not going back to that corner." She looked at him with curious eyes, waiting for the explanation that would determine whether her moment of authority had been an emergency exception or a permanent change. "You're staying right here," Collins continued, "where you belong." The tent fell quiet except for the distant sound of artillery and the soft hum of electronics. Officers exchanged glances, understanding that something fundamental had shifted. In their command structure, Lena Ray was no longer just the woman behind the screen. She was the woman who had stepped forward when forward was the only direction that mattered. Outside, the enemy retreat continued under the weight of American artillery. Their surprise attack transformed into a lesson about the consequences of underestimating expertise, regardless of its source. The mathematical precision of Lena's analysis had become the brutal reality of enemy defeat, proving that authority without competence was just noise, while competence without authority was just waiting for the right moment to speak. The morning after the battle, Lena arrived at the command tent to find her world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The folding chair that had been her throne in the corner had been replaced with a proper field seat, ergonomic and adjustable, designed for extended tactical operations. Her single monitor had been joined by 2 additional displays, creating a command station that spoke of permanent integration rather than temporary accommodation. Most significantly, a combat terminal had been installed at her position, complete with encrypted communications and direct fire control access. The kind of equipment reserved for officers, not technical support specialists. The kind of authority that came with rank and recognition, not civilian contractor status. Major Collins entered the tent as she was examining the new setup, his expression unreadable in the way that suggested careful consideration of words not yet spoken. Behind him came Lieutenant Morrison, his earlier skepticism replaced by something more complex, respect mixed with reluctant acknowledgement. "Miss Ray," Collins said, settling into his own chair with the deliberate movements of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about this conversation. "We need to discuss your status." Lena looked up from her screens, where overnight intelligence reports painted a picture of enemy forces regrouping at a safe distance, their surprise attack having become a costly lesson in American resolve. "My status, sir?" "Yesterday's action raises questions about command structure and operational authority." Collins pulled out a folder thick with official documents. "The after-action report requires careful explanation of how a civilian contractor came to direct tactical fire missions." Morrison leaned forward, his academy training evident in his precise posture. "Officially, emergency protocols allowed for temporary assumption of tactical command when regular chain of command was compromised. Your technical expertise qualified you to coordinate fire support under emergency conditions." The carefully constructed language was military bureaucracy at its finest, describing reality in terms that would satisfy official requirements while acknowledging the truth that everyone in the tent understood. Lena had saved lives by acting outside her authority, and now that authority needed to be adjusted to match her demonstrated competence. "Unofficially," Collins continued, "you did what needed doing when nobody else could do it. The question now is how to prevent future situations where critical expertise is ignored because it comes from someone without the proper uniform." Lena nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. Military organizations operated on clearly defined hierarchies for good reasons, but those hierarchies sometimes prevented the right information from reaching the right people at the right time. Her technical expertise had proven tactically valuable, but integrating that expertise into the command structure required careful navigation of regulations and protocols. "What are you proposing, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying the professional. Neutrality of someone who had learned to let others make decisions about her future. Embedded tactical consultant, Morrison replied, reading from his notes. Direct liaison between technical analysis and operational command. Authority to provide tactical recommendations based on technical analysis, with direct access to fire control systems under emergency conditions. The title was Creative Bureaucracy, creating space for her expertise within the existing command structure without requiring changes to regulations that would take months to implement. It acknowledged her value while maintaining the chain of command that military operations required. Your security clearance is being upgraded, Collins added. Full access to intelligence reports, tactical planning sessions, and operational briefings. No more sitting in the corner watching screens while we ignore what they're telling us. Sergeant Williams entered the tent, his morning report in hand, and stopped short when he saw the new configuration. "Morning, ma'am," he said to Lena, the address carrying recognition that hadn't been there before. "Control, this is Op 7. All quiet on the eastern approaches. Enemy units appear to be maintaining defensive positions at grid reference 275442. Lena pulled up her screens, cross-referencing the reported positions with overnight movement analysis. Confirmed, Sergeant. Satellite. Imagery shows defensive positioning consistent with regrouping after tactical withdrawal. No immediate threat indicators. The interaction was professional, efficient, and completely different from the dismissive acknowledgments that had characterized their previous communications. Williams treated her input as valuable intelligence rather than technical noise, asking follow-up questions and incorporating her analysis into his tactical assessment. Corporal Jenkins approached her station with the confidence of someone who had shared a moment of crisis and emerged with mutual respect. "Ma'am, the fire control systems are showing some residual calibration errors from yesterday's action. Should I run a full diagnostic?" "Run the diagnostic, but also pull up the ballistic analysis from yesterday's fire missions," Lena replied. "We need to verify that our targeting solutions maintained accuracy under emergency conditions." Jenkins nodded, understanding that her request went beyond routine maintenance. They were conducting a professional review of their tactical performance, ensuring that lessons learned would improve future operations. The kind of detailed analysis that turned successful actions into reliable procedures. The morning briefing began with Collins addressing the assembled officers and senior enlisted personnel. Yesterday's action demonstrated the value of integrated technical analysis in tactical operations. Moving forward, Miss Ray will be participating in all planning sessions as our embedded tactical consultant. No one objected. No one questioned the decision. The results spoke for themselves. Her analysis had been accurate. Her tactical recommendations had been effective, and her emergency command authority had turned a surprise attack into an enemy defeat. Success was its own justification. Lieutenant Morrison outlined the day's patrol schedules, incorporating route adjustments based on Lena's overnight analysis of enemy repositioning. The recommendations were presented as tactical intelligence rather than technical suggestions, integrated into operational planning rather than relegated to maintenance considerations. "Miss Ray, what's your assessment of enemy intentions based on current positioning?" Collins asked, his question carrying the weight of genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. Lena studied her screens, analyzing movement patterns and positioning that told a story of tactical adjustment rather than strategic withdrawal. Their current positions suggest defensive regrouping rather than retreat. They're maintaining observation of our approaches while staying outside our direct fire range. Recommendations? Increase patrol activity along secondary routes, enhanced electronic surveillance of their communications, and adjusted fire support positioning to counter their defensive advantage. She highlighted specific grid references on the tactical display. These positions would allow us to maintain tactical pressure while gathering intelligence on their future intentions. The recommendations were specific, actionable, and based on analysis that integrated technical expertise with tactical understanding. They represented the kind of informed decision-making that came from combining different types of expertise rather than relegating some voices to technical support. The briefing continued with the kind of professional interaction that acknowledged expertise regardless of its source. Officers asked questions about her analysis, incorporated her recommendations into their planning, and treated her input as valuable intelligence rather than interesting observation. As the meeting concluded, Collins approached her station with an expression that suggested satisfaction with the problem solved. "Miss Ray, there's one more thing. Your title may be civilian contractor, but your contribution to this operation has been essential. The men understand that, and they respect it." Lena looked around the tent, seeing the subtle changes that indicated her transformed status. Officers who had previously dismissed her analysis now sought her input on tactical questions. Enlisted personnel who had treated her as furniture now addressed her with the respect accorded to someone whose expertise had proven itself under fire. "Thank you, sir," she replied, understanding that respect earned through competence was more valuable than authority granted through regulation. "I'm here to do whatever job needs doing." Collins nodded, recognizing the quiet professionalism that had characterized her approach from the beginning. "Yesterday, you proved that the most important voice in the room sometimes belongs to someone nobody thought to listen to. Today, we're making sure that voice is heard." The morning briefing ended with assignments that reflected her new status: full participation in tactical planning, direct access to intelligence reports, and authority to coordinate fire support under emergency conditions. Her technical expertise had been integrated into the command structure, creating space for valuable input regardless of its source. As the officers dispersed to their various duties, Lena remained at her station, monitoring screens that now carried the weight of acknowledged authority. The enemy was still out there, regrouping and planning their next move. But now she was part of the team that would anticipate and counter those moves, her expertise valued as essential rather than ignored as irrelevant. The morning sun filtered through the tent walls, illuminating a command structure that had learned to value competence over credentials, expertise over authority, and results over regulations. Yesterday's emergency had become today's evolution, creating space for voices that had been dismissed until the moment when listening became the difference between victory and defeat. 3 days after the battle, the enemy tested their new defensive arrangements with a series of probing attacks designed to identify weaknesses in their response capabilities. What they found instead was a transformed command structure that anticipated their moves with mathematical precision and countered them with devastating efficiency. Lena had spent those 3 days immersed in intelligence analysis and tactical planning, her new status allowing her to participate in briefings that revealed the broader strategic picture. The enemy forces that had withdrawn after their failed surprise attack were part of a larger operation, probing American positions along multiple fronts to identify opportunities for a more significant assault. Her screens showed the pattern clearly: coordinated reconnaissance, systematic testing of defensive responses, careful mapping of American capabilities and limitations, the kind of professional military analysis that suggested their opponents were far more sophisticated than initial intelligence had indicated. "They're learning our response patterns," she told the morning briefing, highlighting movement tracks that showed enemy units withdrawing immediately after triggering defensive reactions. "Each probe is designed to measure our response time, identify our fire support capabilities, and map our patrol routes." Major Collins studied the tactical display, his expression reflecting growing concern about the implications of her analysis. How long before they have enough information to plan a major assault? Based on current pattern analysis, they need approximately 4 more probe sequences to complete their intelligence picture. Lena pulled up predictive models that showed enemy information gathering progressing toward operational planning. Unless we change our response patterns to deny them the intelligence they're seeking. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward, his academy training evident in his systematic approach to the problem. What do you recommend? Deception operations. False response patterns that provide misleading information about our capabilities and positioning. She highlighted specific grid references when they could stage false defensive reactions. We give them the intelligence they're seeking, but we make sure it's wrong. The recommendation represented a fundamental shift from reactive defense to proactive deception, using the enemy's intelligence gathering against them. Instead of simply responding to probes, they would orchestrate responses that painted a false picture of American capabilities. Sergeant Williams nodded approvingly, recognizing the tactical sophistication of the approach. We make them think they know what we can do, then hit them with what they don't expect. Exactly, Lena confirmed. Their next probe is scheduled for this afternoon based on their established pattern. We respond with a defensive sequence that suggests our fire support is concentrated in grid reference 417-283, with response times that appear slower than our actual capabilities. Collins studied the deception plan, recognizing its elegance and potential effectiveness. And when they plan their assault based on false intelligence, we demonstrate the difference between what they think they know and what we actually can do. Lena's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone whose analysis had proven accurate under the most demanding circumstances. The afternoon probe developed exactly as her pattern analysis had predicted. Enemy reconnaissance units approached their perimeter at 14:30 hours, using the same routes and techniques that had characterized their previous intelligence gathering. But this time, the American response was carefully choreographed theater designed to mislead rather than repel. Lena coordinated the deception from her station, timing defensive reactions to suggest vulnerabilities that didn't exist and capabilities that were deliberately understated. Artillery responses arrived 30 seconds later than optimal, giving the impression of delayed coordination. Patrol reactions followed predictable routes that suggested limited flexibility in defensive positioning. Op 7, this is Control. She transmitted to Sergeant Williams at the forward observation post. Execute defensive sequence Charlie. Make it look like we're struggling to coordinate fire support. Williams played his role perfectly, requesting fire support with transmissions that suggested confusion and delayed response times. The artillery fire that eventually arrived was accurate, but appeared to require excessive coordination time, painting a picture of defensive capabilities that were effective but slow to respond. The enemy reconnaissance units withdrew after gathering what they believed was valuable intelligence about American defensive limitations. Their departure pattern suggested satisfaction with the information they had collected, confirming that the deception had been successful. Pattern analysis suggests they've accepted the false intelligence, Lena reported as the probe concluded. Their withdrawal routes indicate confidence in their assessment of our defensive capabilities. Collins nodded, recognizing the tactical advantage they had gained through successful deception. How long before they act on this intelligence? Based on their operational patterns, they'll require 24 to 48 hours to integrate this intelligence into assault planning. She pulled up predictive models that showed enemy decision-making timelines. We should expect their major assault attempt within the next 2 days. The evening briefing included detailed planning for the anticipated enemy assault, incorporating intelligence gathered through their deception operations. They knew approximately when the attack would come, understood the enemy's misconceptions about American capabilities, and could position their forces to exploit those misconceptions. Miss Ray's analysis gives us tactical advantage that we wouldn't have achieved through conventional defensive measures, Collins told the assembled officers. We're not just responding to enemy actions. We're shaping their decision-making process. Lieutenant Morrison outlined defensive positioning that would capitalize on enemy misconceptions, placing fire support assets where they could deliver maximum surprise when the assault began. The plan transformed their defensive preparations, from reactive positioning to proactive deception. Sergeant Williams reported from the forward observation post with evident satisfaction. The enemy thinks they know what we can do and where we can do it. They're planning their assault based on intelligence that's going to get them killed. The transformation was complete. 3 days earlier, Lena's expertise had been dismissed as technical noise. Now, her analysis was driving tactical planning and shaping operational decisions. The emergency that had forced recognition of her capabilities had evolved into systematic integration of her expertise into command decision-making. Corporal Jenkins approached her station with updates on artillery positioning, his questions reflecting understanding that her recommendations carried tactical authority rather than technical suggestion. Ma'am, Battery 2 reports ready to execute. Fire missions from alternate positions. They're concealed and ready to deliver surprise fire when the enemy assault begins. Confirmed, Lena replied, updating her tactical displays to reflect artillery positioning that would support the deception. Plan. Enemy intelligence suggests our fire support is concentrated in the eastern sector. Battery 2's actual position in the northern sector will provide devastating surprise when they reveal their true capabilities. The evening concluded with final preparations for the anticipated assault. Every detail designed to exploit enemy misconceptions, created through successful deception operations. What had begun as reactive defense had evolved into sophisticated tactical manipulation, using the enemy's intelligence gathering against them. As night fell over the base, Lena remained at her station, monitoring intelligence feeds that showed enemy forces preparing for an assault based on false information. Their careful analysis had been turned against them, their systematic intelligence gathering transformed into the foundation of their tactical defeat. The screens painted a picture of enemy forces positioning for assault, confident in intelligence. That would lead them into carefully prepared destruction. Mathematical precision had become tactical deception. Analysis had become manipulation, and expertise that had once been dismissed as technical noise now drove operations that would determine the outcome of the coming battle. Tomorrow would test whether her analysis was as accurate in predicting enemy defeat as it had been in anticipating their assault. The proving ground would demonstrate whether expertise without authority could become authority earned through results, transforming the woman behind the screen into the strategist who shaped the battlefield itself. The enemy assault began at 05:15 hours, exactly 17 minutes within the time frame Lena's analysis had predicted. They approached with the confidence of forces operating on superior intelligence, positioning their units to exploit weaknesses that existed only in the false picture American deception operations had painted for them. Lena watched their advance unfold on her screens with the satisfaction of a chess master watching an opponent walk into a carefully prepared trap. Every enemy movement confirmed the success of their deception plan, showing forces positioned to attack defensive arrangements that had been deliberately misrepresented to lure them into tactical disaster. Enemy units advancing along predicted routes, she reported to the command staff assembled around her station. They're committing their main assault force to the eastern sector, exactly where our deception suggested our fire support was concentrated. Major Collins studied the tactical display, seeing enemy forces moving with purpose toward positions they believed were vulnerable. Confirmation that they've accepted our false intelligence? Complete acceptance, Lena confirmed, highlighting enemy formation patterns that showed tactical planning based entirely on the misleading information they had been fed. They're positioning for breakthrough assault against defensive arrangements that don't exist. The enemy had committed 3 mechanized units to their main assault, supported by artillery, positioned to suppress American fire support that they believed was concentrated in the eastern defensive sector. Their careful intelligence gathering had convinced them they understood American capabilities and limitations, creating confidence that would become catastrophic miscalculation. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated communication with forward observation posts, his voice carrying the controlled excitement of someone watching a perfect plan unfold. Op 7 reports enemy main force crossing phase line Alpha. They're moving with purpose toward eastern defensive positions. Let them come, Collins replied, his voice reflecting satisfaction with tactical positioning that would soon reveal its true purpose. Miss Ray, what's your assessment of optimal engagement timing? Lena analyzed enemy movement patterns, calculating the precise moment when their assault force would be most vulnerable to the surprise that awaited them. Optimal engagement in approximately 8 minutes, when their main force reaches grid reference 374291. They'll be committed to assault formation with limited ability to adjust positioning. The timing was critical. Too early, and enemy forces could withdraw and reposition. Too late, and they might achieve tactical surprise against positions they believed were weakly defended. But at the optimal moment, their assault formation would become a target array perfectly positioned for devastating counterattack. Battery 2 reports ready for surprise fire mission. Corporal Jenkins announced from the fire control console. Coordinates locked, ammunition prepared, waiting for engagement command. Battery 2 occupied concealed positions in the northern sector, exactly opposite from where enemy intelligence suggested American fire support was concentrated. Their artillery pieces were trained on grid coordinates where enemy forces would be most vulnerable, prepared to deliver surprise fire that would transform confident assault into chaotic retreat. Forward observer reports enemy artillery positioning for suppression fire on eastern defensive sector. Sergeant Williams transmitted from Op 7. They're preparing to suppress fire support that isn't there. The deception was working perfectly. Enemy forces were positioning to suppress American capabilities that had been deliberately misrepresented, concentrating their efforts against defensive arrangements that existed only in their tactical planning. Meanwhile, actual American fire support remained concealed and ready to deliver devastating surprise. Lena watched the tactical display update in real time, showing enemy forces moving into the engagement area with precision that would become their undoing. Enemy main force reaching optimal engagement zone. Recommend immediate execution of surprise fire mission. Battery 2, execute fire mission, Collins commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to trust analysis. That had proven accurate under the most demanding circumstances. The first American artillery round screamed into the sky from the northern sector, announcing the presence of fire support that enemy intelligence had failed to detect. The surprise was complete, catching enemy forces in assault formation with no preparation for fire coming from an unexpected direction. Direct hit on enemy lead vehicle, Williams reported with evident satisfaction. Enemy formation breaking apart under surprise fire. They're attempting to reposition, but maintaining forward momentum. The enemy assault continued, but their tactical advantage had evaporated with the first surprise artillery strike. Forces that had been advancing with confidence now found themselves under fire from positions they hadn't known existed. Their careful intelligence gathering revealed as manipulated deception. Battery 3, execute secondary fire mission, Lena commanded, coordinating fire from multiple positions to maximize the confusion and destruction being visited upon enemy forces. Target designation Hotel 12. Enemy command element attempting to coordinate response. The 2nd Artillery Battery revealed its position by engaging enemy command units that were struggling to understand how their superior intelligence had become tactical disaster. Their communication attempts were interrupted by precision fire that eliminated command vehicles and disrupted coordination efforts. Enemy assault completely disrupted, Morrison reported, his voice carrying amazement at the thoroughness of their tactical success. They're attempting to withdraw but maintaining some forward elements. The enemy found themselves trapped between their original assault objectives and the unexpected fire that was destroying their formation. Some units continued forward, hoping to achieve their mission despite the tactical surprise. Others attempted withdrawal, recognizing that their assault had become catastrophic failure. Lena coordinated the pursuit, directing fire missions that prevented enemy withdrawal while maintaining pressure on forces still attempting to advance. Battery 4. Interdict withdrawal routes at grid reference 287-415. Deny enemy forces organized retreat. The tactical display showed enemy forces scattered across the battlefield. Their coordinated assault dissolved into isolated units struggling for survival. What had begun as confident attack based on superior intelligence had become chaotic rout under American fire that came from unexpected directions. Enemy artillery falling silent, Williams reported. Their fire support appears to be repositioning or withdrawing, no longer attempting suppression of eastern sector. The enemy's artillery, positioned to suppress American fire support in the eastern sector, found themselves engaging empty positions while actual American artillery devastated their assault forces from concealed positions. Their careful planning had been turned against them. Their intelligence gathering transformed into the foundation of their tactical defeat. Collins approached Lena's station, his expression reflecting recognition of tactical brilliance that had transformed defensive operation into offensive victory. "Miss Ray, your analysis and deception plan has achieved complete tactical success. Enemy assault neutralized with minimal American casualties. Analysis is only as good as the execution it enables, sir," Lena replied, her voice carrying the quiet professionalism that had characterized her approach throughout the operation. The deception worked because everyone played their role perfectly. The battle continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome had been determined in the first 8 minutes when surprise artillery revealed the gap between enemy perception and American reality. Their confidence had become catastrophe. Their intelligence had become deception, and their assault had become retreat. As enemy forces withdrew in disorder, leaving behind destroyed vehicles and abandoned equipment, the command tent filled with the satisfaction of tactical victory achieved through superior analysis and flawless execution. What had begun as enemy intelligence gathering had become American tactical manipulation, transforming the battlefield into a demonstration of expertise properly applied. The woman who had once been dismissed as technical support had orchestrated a tactical masterpiece that would be studied in military academies for its elegant use of deception and precise timing of surprise. Her analysis had shaped the battlefield. Her planning had determined the outcome, and her authority had been established through results that spoke louder than any regulation or protocol. The perfect storm had arrived, and with it, the complete transformation of how expertise was valued regardless of its source. 6 weeks after the battle that changed everything, Lena Ray sat in what had once been the corner of the command tent, now expanded into a proper tactical analysis center with multiple screens, secure communications, and direct liaison capability with intelligence agencies that had taken notice of her work. The folding chair had been replaced with ergonomic equipment, but more importantly, the dismissive attitudes had been replaced with professional respect earned through proven competence. The morning briefing began with Major Collins addressing assembled officers and senior enlisted personnel, his words carrying the weight of lessons learned through bitter experience and tactical success. Ladies and gentlemen, before we review today's intelligence summary, I want to address something that should have been obvious from the beginning. He gestured toward Lena's station, where screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from across the operational area. Ms. Ray's analysis over the past 6 weeks has prevented 2 additional enemy assaults, identified 3 weapons caches, and provided tactical intelligence that has kept this unit ahead of enemy planning efforts. The transformation was visible in the faces around the tent. Officers who had once dismissed her expertise now sought her input on routine decisions. Enlisted personnel who had treated her as furniture now addressed her with the respect accorded to someone whose competence had been proven under fire. Lieutenant Morrison, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated, approached her station with the morning intelligence summary. "Ma'am, overnight surveillance shows enemy forces have withdrawn to positions approximately 15 kilometers beyond our operational area. Pattern analysis suggests they've abandoned local operations." "Confirmed," Lena replied, cross-referencing satellite imagery with communication intercepts that painted a picture of enemy forces, recognizing the futility of continued operations against a unit that anticipated their every move. Intelligence indicates they've redesignated this area as tactically unfavorable due to superior American intelligence capabilities. The irony was elegant. An enemy that had relied on superior intelligence gathering to plan their operations had been defeated by intelligence analysis they had dismissed as irrelevant. Their tactical sophistication had been matched by analytical capability they hadn't bothered to identify, creating conditions for their repeated defeat. Sergeant Williams entered with his daily report, his professional demeanor reflecting the respect that had replaced his earlier casual dismissal. "Ma'am, Op 7 reports all quiet along the perimeter. Local population indicates enemy recruitment efforts have ceased in this area." The enemy withdrawal represented more than tactical defeat. It demonstrated strategic recognition that continued. Operations against this particular American unit would result in continued failure. They had learned, through painful experience, that some battles were determined by factors they had failed to identify until those factors shaped their defeat. Collins addressed the assembled staff with words that acknowledged realities that should have been obvious from the beginning. The events of the past 6 weeks have demonstrated that expertise exists in many forms, and our effectiveness depends on recognizing and utilizing that expertise regardless of its source. The statement was military bureaucracy's way of admitting fundamental error without requiring formal acknowledgement of institutional failure. It created space for lessons learned while maintaining the fiction that proper procedures had been followed throughout. Corporal Jenkins approached Lena's station with technical updates that reflected the integration of her analytical capabilities into routine operations. "Ma'am, the new fire control systems are online and calibrated according to your specifications. Response time has improved by 37%. "Excellent," Lena replied, reviewing system diagnostics that showed technological improvements driven by analytical understanding of tactical requirements. "Run a full systems check and update the ballistic calculations based on yesterday's meteorological data." The technical conversation reflected a fundamental shift in how her expertise was perceived and utilized. No longer relegated to equipment maintenance, her technical knowledge was now integrated into tactical operations, creating capabilities that enhanced unit effectiveness across multiple operational areas. The morning briefing concluded with assignments that reflected her permanent integration into command decision-making. Intelligence analysis, tactical planning, operational coordination, and strategic assessment all included her input as essential rather than optional, valuable rather than interesting, authoritative rather than advisory. As officers dispersed to their various duties, Collins approached her station with an expression that suggested satisfaction with problems solved and lessons learned. "Miss Ray, I've received official notification regarding your status with this unit." Lena looked up from her screens, curiosity tempered by experience with military bureaucracy's ability to create complications from simple situations. "Sir, effective immediately. Your contract has been extended indefinitely with expanded authority for tactical analysis and operational planning." Collins handed her official documentation that formalized what had become practical reality. "Your security clearance has been upgraded to include access to strategic intelligence databases." The paperwork represented official recognition of competence that had been demonstrated under the most demanding circumstances. Authority that had been seized during emergency had become authority granted through proven performance, creating space within military hierarchy for expertise regardless of its source. Additionally, Collins continued, "Your analytical methods are being incorporated into training programs at the Command and Staff College. Your deception operations case study will be required reading for intelligence officers." The recognition extended beyond her immediate unit to institutional acknowledgement that her approach to intelligence analysis represented advancement in tactical thinking. Methods that had been dismissed as technical noise were now being studied as innovative integration of analytical capability with operational planning. Lieutenant Morrison approached with updates that reflected the ongoing evolution of their operational capabilities. "Ma'am, intelligence requests your assessment of enemy activity patterns in adjacent operational areas. Higher Headquarters wants to know if your analytical methods can be applied to regional threat assessment." "I'll need access to regional intelligence databases and satellite surveillance beyond our current operational area," Lena replied, understanding that success had created demand for expanded application of her analytical capabilities. "Already authorized," Morrison confirmed. "You now have access to regional intelligence fusion centers and strategic surveillance assets." The expansion represented institutional recognition that her analytical approach had value beyond local tactical application. Success at the unit level had created interest at higher levels of command, generating opportunities to apply her methods to broader strategic challenges. As the day progressed, Lena found herself coordinating with intelligence agencies, academic institutions, and military commands that sought to understand and replicate her analytical success. What had begun as dismissive treatment of technical expertise had evolved into institutional recognition of innovative approaches to intelligence analysis. The woman who had once been relegated to screen maintenance now provided analytical support to operational planning across multiple units and geographic areas. Her expertise, once dismissed as irrelevant, had become sought-after capability that enhanced American tactical effectiveness. But the most significant change was not in official recognition or expanded authority. It was in the simple acknowledgement that competence existed in many forms, that expertise came from unexpected sources, and that the most important voice in the room sometimes belonged to someone nobody had thought to listen to. The sun set over forward operating base Granite, illuminating a command structure that had learned to value results over credentials, competence over authority, and expertise over rank. The woman behind the screen had become the analyst who shaped operations. The technician had become the strategist, and the voice that had been dismissed as technical noise had become the authority that others sought to emulate. Lena Ray remained at her station as evening fell, monitoring intelligence feeds that painted pictures of a battlefield where American forces operated with analytical advantage earned through lessons learned and expertise acknowledged. The screens still blinked, the data still flowed, and the analysis still shaped decisions. But now, when she spoke, the room listened, because they had learned, through experience written in blood and steel, that sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to someone nobody thought to listen to until the moment when listening became the difference between victory and defeat, between success and failure, between the woman behind the screen and the woman who changed everything. The transformation was complete. Respect had been earned, authority had been acknowledged, and expertise had found its proper place in the hierarchy that determined life and death. The new dawn had arrived, and with it, the recognition that competence comes in many forms and wisdom often speaks from the most unexpected places. In the end, they had learned to listen. And in learning to listen, they had discovered that the woman they had dismissed as just a technician was exactly what they had needed all along. Someone with the courage to speak when no one else would, the expertise to be right when being right mattered most, and the quiet professionalism to use authority wisely when authority was finally granted. The lights kept blinking, the data kept flowing, and the woman who had stepped forward when forward was the only direction that mattered continued to wash over them all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.